Okay, welcome back, everybody. Okay, we asked the question before our little break about Samson as judge and some possible reasons why the Israelites asked the kind of question that they did to Samson. Don't you know that the Philistines rule over us? What have you done? We're going to deliver you to the Philistines. One of the interesting reasons, probable reasons behind their not understanding who Samson was and what God was doing through Samson is in his reply. He says, well, before his reply, in verse 7, he says, since you would do such a thing, I will surely take revenge on you, and after that I will cease. And then when the Israelites asked Samson, why have you done this? He says, what they did to me, I've done to them. Look in your Bibles in Judges chapter 11. One of the last judges that we have much detail on is Jephthah. That's a heartbreaking story in and of itself. When Jephthah is addressing the people of Ammon, look at how he phrases things, starting in verse 12. Judges 11, verse 12. He asks them, what do you have against me that you have come to fight against me in my land? And the Ammonites respond, because Israel took away my land when they came out of Egypt. And make some details about that. And then Jephthah sends a messenger back to them, and he says in verse 15, thus says Jephthah, Israel did not take away the land of Moab, nor the land of the people of Ammon. For when Israel came up from Egypt, they walked through the wilderness as far as the Red Sea and came to Kadesh. Then Israel sent messengers to the king of Edom, and he goes on and repeats a lot of the history. Jephthah phrases everything in terms of Israel versus these nations. How does Samson phrase things? Judges 15.
It's all phrased around him. Like Samson, when he is attacking the Philistines, it's never over anything they've done to Israel necessarily. It's just over what his personal situation is.
Judges 15:7. How does Samson phrase things? Anybody see a difference there? Alejandro, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I said I. Whereas Jephthah says Israel, Samson says I. Really?
There we go.
Is my audio not coming through? Okay, sweet.
Oh, can't hear you still.
Really?
I'm sorry.
Huh.
I can hear him.
Gotta love these technical issues, huh?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, sorry. All right. Somebody read Alejandro's mind and communicate what he was going to say.
Can you hear me?
What's the difference between
Michael, can you
this
hear
former
us?
judge Jephthah and Samson's response?
Michael, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, just making sure.
Sorry. Not a very optimal situation, but all right. Try again. Alejandro, go for it.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, yes. No.
Give me a moment. I'm hitting the wrong buttons.
You got-
Samson, Jephthah refers to, whenever he's talking about the conflict between the oppressors and Israel, he says Israel. He's talking about the nation as a whole, as you were saying. Then Samson refers to things personally as what they've done to him rather than to the nation.
Yes.
I think Jeriah was saying that too.
Yeah, okay, good. I'm glad, even though I couldn't hear it. Yes, exactly. Samson is all about himself. His conflict with the Philistines is just him. And so when the Israelites, his brethren from the tribe of Judah, come up there and confront him about what is he doing, previous challenges to the judges. We saw this with Gideon. We saw this in Jephthah especially, that their response was as a representative of the whole nation. Samson doesn't do that. Samson is representing himself.
It's his own personal vendetta against the Philistines rather than the nation of Israel.
That's right. Yeah. And if we just step aside for a moment and ask some of the bigger questions from this story about, along the lines of application, why would God use somebody like Samson to do what he intended to do? The story could be told very differently if Samson had a heart for the Lord, and if Samson understood what God was wanting to accomplish through him. The story would read at a macro level, at a very high level, it would be very, very much the same. There would still be this conflict between Israel and the Philistines, and Samson would begin the work of delivering Israel from the Philistines. But what we have instead is Samson is consumed with himself. From the very beginning, the first thing that we read about him in chapter 14, when we read some of the things that he talks about, it's get this woman for me because she pleases me well. And that is true through the rest of his life. We're going to see that in the next chapter as well. At the very last part of his life, it's still going to be about him. So why would God use somebody like that? The basic answer is that God accomplishing his will is not deterred or thwarted by our failures. God is still going to use whatever situation is around to bring about his will. We can cooperate with that, and we can experience the blessings of walking with the Lord as he works in and through us, or we can resist every step along the way. God is still going to accomplish what he's going to accomplish, but the cost to us is going to be very different if we're in a situation like Samson, as opposed to walking with him and seeking him every step along the way. So that's one of the big application points to the story of Samson. God is bigger than anything that we try to accomplish. His work is still going to be done. And that's an encouragement to me, because I find myself heading off in my own direction all the time. And, that's just a horrible fact of being a sinner saved by grace. But by God's grace, we can walk with him and do our best to cooperate with his work in our lives. Okay, so look at verse 8, Judges 15:8. Samson makes this oath. He says, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to stop. So he attacked them hip and thigh with a great slaughter. That's New King James, hip and thigh. What do some of your translations say in verse 8?
My ESV version is the same. He struck them hip and thigh.
Hip and thigh. Okay.
Mine says he attacked them viciously and slaughtered many of them.
Yeah. What translation is that?
NIV.
NIV. Okay. Yeah. Viciously. Elise, yours was ESV. Is that what you said? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody have a NLT?
Yeah, mine says he killed them with he struck them with great fury and killed many of them.
Okay, yeah, great fury. Obviously, that phrase hip and thigh is an idiom. And it's just interesting to see how that is translated in different versions. But the whole idea, you get the picture here. It's vicious. It is with great fury. And the result is a great slaughter. Pretty amazing. So once again, we see Samson acting from this selfish orientation. He wants revenge for himself, and the expression of that vengeance is with fury and just awful rage as he attacks the Philistines. And the result is a great slaughter. This time we are not told how many people died as a result of Samson's anger, but we just know that it's a horrible massacre done with fury and rage. And then we read, then he went down and dwelt in the cleft of the rock of Edom. That's like, what? The next time we see Samson killing a bunch of Philistines, we see that the result right after the battle is quite different. He is so weak that he thinks he's going to die. But this time he doesn't. He goes to the rock of Edom. Then the Philistines went up, encamped in Judah, and deployed themselves against Lehi. And the men of Judah said, why have you come up against us? And they answered, we've come up to arrest Samson, to do him as he has done to us. And then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock of Edom and said to Samson, do you not know that the Philistines rule over us? What is this you've done to us? See, they are seeing the direct impact upon themselves as well. Because this is so personal, every conflict along the way so far, even though it is escalating, and now the nation of the Philistines is getting involved and coming against the nation, the tribe of Judah, they are still seeing this as a very personal conflict that is going on between the Philistines and the people of Israel. So 3,000 of them go down to get Samson. And his answer to that question, what is this you've done to us? His answer is, as they've done to me, it's all about me. So I have done to them. But they said to them, we've come down to arrest you that we may deliver you into the hand of the Philistines. And Samson said, "Swear to me that you will not kill me yourselves." So they spoke to him, saying, "No, but we will tie you securely and deliver you into their hand, but we will surely not kill you." And they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. Now, this is a little seed that we're going to see later on in chapter 16, this thing about new ropes and how Samson, they were nothing to him. And we're going to see this repeated in chapter 16. So they bind him and took him out from where he was. And verse 14, when he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting against him. Then the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and the ropes that were on his arms became like flax that is burned with fire, and his bonds broke loose from his hands. Now you notice this was not Samson breaking the ropes. The ropes became like ash, flax that had been burned. It's like they had sprinkled ashes on his wrists. It was nothing to him. So this breaking of the ropes was not because of his great strength. It was because of God delivering him out of this binding. And this is the next mention of the Spirit of the Lord coming mightily upon him. We have seen Samson involved in these conflicts that he has been doing. The first time when the lion surprised him and came out of the vineyard, the Spirit of the Lord came on him. And then we saw Samson doing several things, and we don't have the mention of the Spirit of the Lord coming upon him. It's pretty obvious that some of the things that Samson had accomplished were not out of his own strength. But it's just a really interesting point that only a couple of times do we read specifically that it was the Spirit of the Lord working in him. And this is one of those instances. So his bonds broke loose from his hands. And just again, make note, it's not he broke loose from his bonds. The bonds broke loose from his hands. He found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, reached out his hand and took it and killed 1,000 men with it. Then Samson said, "With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey, I was slain 1,000 men." And so it was when he finished speaking that he threw the jawbone from his hand and called that place Ramath Lehi, that is Jawbone Heights. Then he became very thirsty. So he cried out to the Lord and said, "You've given us great deliverance by the hand of your servant, and now shall I die of thirst and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised?" Where have we seen that kind of thing before?
The Israelites in
Moses
the
and-
desert.
Israelites in the desert, Moses, where?
I was going to say with Moses in the wilderness when the Israelites were complaining.
Yep. Can you think of another instance where a great victory is followed by the person involved whining and complaining? How about Elijah? Remember the confrontation between Elijah and the prophets of Baal, and where they offered their sacrifice and they danced around and they were cutting themselves and nothing happened. And then Elijah had them pour all of this water after 3 years of drought, poured all of this water on the sacrifice on the altar, and the fire came down from heaven and burned up, accepted the sacrifice, burned it all up. And then Elijah had these 300 prophets killed, put to death. And then he runs because his life is threatened. And he gets to the end and he says, I'm going to die. I'm the only one left, Lord. Why have you done this? I'm the only one left. I'm going to die after all the stuff that I've done for you. Right? It's kind of a typical response. It's very easy to get into that kind of position, you know, to be walking along and everything is going really great. And then all it takes is just this little thing. And we think life is over. Here's Samson, after killing 1,000 Philistines, becomes very thirsty. Oh my goodness, poor Samson. He's thirsty. Verse 19, God split the hollow place. Oops, sorry. That's supposed to be on do not disturb, and it's not. It is now. All right. So in verse 19, God split the hollow place that is in Lehi, and water came out, and he drank, and his spirit returned, and he revived. All right. It's so easy to let physical discomfort destroy our spiritual stability. It's just way too easy. And, you know, we talked about a couple of examples. You know, the Israelites, you know, things got uncomfortable in the desert. God, what are you doing? What are you doing? I don't like this. You know, it's just, it's a part, legitimately, it's a part of our experience in life under the sun, this 100 years that we have. It doesn't take much of physical discomfort to completely disorient us spiritually. And that's just a warning to us to watch out for that kind of thing. Remember Manoah, Samson's father, when he offered the sacrifice and the angel stepped onto the sacrifice and ascended to heaven, and Manoah falls down. We're going to die. We're going to die. You know, it's just so easy to get so out of focus and out of tune. And Samson's mother was that wonderful voice of reason, where she says, just think about it. If God was going to kill us, he wouldn't accept our sacrifice. If he was going to kill us, he wouldn't have told us about all these things. If he was going to kill us, you know, we wouldn't be here doing what he's asked us to do. So all it takes is a little bit of discomfort and we can be completely thrown off track. But to get back on track, all it takes is take a step back and remember what God has done and what he has assured us he is going to do. He is going to complete the work that he began in us. Always hang on to that, no matter what the circumstances say otherwise. So Samson called its name in Hakor, which is in Lehi to this day. Now look at verse 20. And he judged Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines. In the other stories of the judges, where do we read that kind of statement? Where does that occur in the storyline?
At the end of the narrative, or each individual narrative. And then it says it usually says they were freed from their oppressors and then they had rest for so many years, usually not every single time.
Right, but enough to show that that's the pattern, and that's what we expect. Yeah. So one of the things that I asked you to think about when you read through chapter 15 was in verse 20, when we read this, and we know there's another chapter coming for the story of Samson. What's going on here? This is a disruption to the narrative cycle that we have observed all the way through the book of Judges to this point. So what's going on? Why do you think the writer would make this statement here instead of at the very end? Any ideas?
Maybe because the very next story is the story of how he basically how he falls and then dies.
Mhm.
You were talking about how they'll often tell a narrative, then zoom in on a story or on a part of the story that he could be kind of marking the end, then going into detail on the end.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really good. That is the kind of storytelling and plot development that we do see in biblical narrative. It's very unexpected at this point because the pattern has been established. You tell the story of the judge, you tell what they have done that kind of elevates them to the position of being judge. And sorry, and then the statement about the fact that they judged Israel for so many years. So we kind of see a lot of those elements in here. How was Samson elevated to the position of judge? Well, the Israelites weren't getting it and they weren't following him. He didn't pull together an army to go and battle against the Philistines. He's done this all himself, and he's done it all for himself. But after this victory, we read very simply and very briefly, and he judged Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines. It's interesting, too, that it is in the days of the Philistines, because the other judges judged Israel after the oppressors were done away with. That wasn't Samson's role. In chapter 13, the angel of the Lord said he is going to begin to deliver Israel from the Philistines. And so God accomplished that in spite of Samson. And he was finally recognized as, all right, I guess you're our judge now. And he judged Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. So they were still around. They were still in a position of a dominion over Israel. And yet here is this judge. And for 20 years, he was in this position. And so if you were a reader of the book of Judges for the very first time, and you were following the plot development and seeing this story, you're really scratching your head and struck very deeply with the condition of the people, with the character of the judge. And so you do want to know more. You want to know, what were these 20 years like, and how did they end? What is going on with the Philistines? Because they're still around. Now, we have seen judges doing their job under the oppression of a foreign nation. We saw that with Deborah. Deborah was a prophetess, and she was judging Israel while under the oppression of a foreign nation. So that isn't all that new, but still we're kind of wondering. We have these questions. We started the story of Samson with great and high expectations. The promise of a judge who would be a Nazarite from birth. Things started in this narrative very differently, and we had more than a glimmer of hope. We had a promise of hope that this guy is going to be different. And yet, because of the irony throughout the story, what his parents didn't know, what Samson didn't know, what the Israelites didn't know. They are just in a state of chaos and anarchy, which is going to lead us into chapter 17. But we are now going to move into chapter 16. And so let's see what was going on in these 20 years in the life of Samson, and especially at the very end. We know that he is well known by the Philistines as well as the Israelites. He had been married and lost his wife twice, basically. She was given away and then she was killed. So what does Samson's life look like? Chapter 16. Now Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot there and went into her. Now we have ideas right away about what this is referring to, that he went in to sleep with her. That's not necessarily the case. We'll talk about that a little bit. Let's read this paragraph and pick up on some clues in here. Verse 2, when the Gazites were told, Samson has come here, they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. They were quiet all night, saying, in the morning, when it is daylight, we will kill him. And Samson lay low till midnight. Then he arose at midnight, took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the two gate posts, pulled them up, bar and all, put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. We are not very often given real explicit time references in our narrative. We have seen a couple of times where phrases like, after a while, after so many days, this happens. Here on this particular day, we are given some very specific time references. The Philistines, the people of Gaza, surround the city and they wait at the gate of the city, and they were quiet all night. And what was their plan? When were they going to attack Samson?
In the morning.
Right, in the morning. And when did he leave the city?
At midnight.
At midnight, right. So there are a lot of questions in there. We could talk about some of those details. Let's go back to the very beginning. Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot and went into her. Now, probably he did go in there to sleep with her. But there are some questions, and there are legitimate questions about that. One is the fact that he didn't stay there all night. He probably heard that the Gazites were there. It says they were quiet all night, so they weren't making noise. But was Samson aware or made aware that they were there? Maybe. But let's go all the way back to Joshua. Joshua sends spies into the land, not the ones that Moses sent in. We're now talking about Joshua sending 2 spies into Jericho. Where did they go?
They went to Rahab's house and hid there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. And she was a prostitute. If you were traveling, there were inns and there were places like that, almost hotel kind of accommodations. But if you were a foreigner and didn't know where to go, or if you were not welcome, and certainly that's town of Gaza. I'll show you a map here in a minute. Samson was a foreigner. This was in the land of the Philistines. One of the most common places to go for accommodation was a prostitute's house, which is not necessarily just like a one-room house or something like that. And that's why the spies from Joshua in Jericho went to Rahab's house. It was a place that you could find accommodation, not necessarily to sleep with a prostitute, but it was a place to stay. That might have been the case here with Samson. But we are told that he saw a woman who was a prostitute and went into her. So, a lot of people are kind of up in the air about what was Samson doing here? Was he sleeping with a prostitute, or did he just go in for accommodation? It's not really clear because that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is what Samson did when he leaves this house at midnight. Rather than staying there all night and coming out in the morning, he goes at midnight to the gate. Now, these people were waiting at the gate. And here he comes walking up. So imagine the scene. All of these people, we have no idea how many, they're gathered at the gate to the city, being quiet, and they're waiting for Samson. He shows up several hours ahead of schedule. Why didn't they attack him? Any ideas?
Maybe because it was nighttime and they had said earlier, let's wait till the morning, wait till the light of morning, then we kill him. But it was still nighttime, so they didn't, maybe?
Yeah, it could very, very well be that they knew he was there by reputation, but did they know what he looked like? I don't know. It's a good question to kind of speculate about. But here comes this guy in the middle of the night. Probably most of them were asleep because they didn't expect him until the next morning. But he shows up in the middle of the night. The gates are closed. That's what the gates were for. They would open in the morning and they would close at night. And if you wanted in during the night, you'd have to make arrangements and arrange for the gates to be open. So here this guy walks up to the gates, but instead of asking for them to be open or identifying himself or anything, what does he do?
What nobody expects.
Yeah. He takes hold of the gates and rips them from the wall. And not only the doors, he says he pulls up, he took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the two gate posts, pulled them up, bar and all, put them on his shoulders, and carries them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. This hill is about 1/4 of a mile from the city. So if you were waiting for your enemy to show up and you were going to ambush him and you weren't sure who he was or what he looked like, and it's the middle of the night and it's dark, and here comes a guy up to the gate, and you're probably wondering, okay, who is it? But then he takes hold of the gates and just rips them up, puts them on his shoulder, and walks uphill for 1/4 of a mile. I don't think I'd attack him. He had a pretty handy shield on his shoulders right at that point.
Jariah is like nodding and smiling, and I want to know what Jariah is thinking right now.
Yeah, go for it. I have a couple of artist rendition of Samson going up the hill with these gates on his shoulder. I'll see if I can find that and show it to you tomorrow. But yeah, this was just an amazing thing. This is one of the more common stories of Samson and his great strength that is told, and it is just it's an awesome little incident here in the story of Samson. I love it. It's just really cool. And you don't see any response at all from the people of Gaza. None. Because the very next story introduces Delilah. We just move on from this story. So where this occurs in that 20 years of Samson judging the nation of Israel, we don't know. It could have been toward the end of his life. It could have been very soon after the slaughter of the 1,000 Philistines. We don't know. But this is the kind of thing that Samson would do. Something's in his way, he moves it. It's just an incredible story. It's a really fun part of the story. Let me show you very quickly, and then we will be done for the day. Here's a close-up view. It's a very busy map. If you see my mouse moving around, here's Zorah. This is Samson's town. And you probably can't here. Let me zoom in a little bit. This is one of those high-res maps that you can get in pretty close. So here's Zorah. Here's that valley of Sorek. It kind of wraps around here. And Timnah is right here. Over here on the coast, and you head south, here's Gaza. So this is where Samson pulled the gates out of the wall and carried them uphill, and he went about 1/4 mile in this direction over here. And then what did he do? He probably just dropped them and kept going. But this is one of the 5 major cities, the capital cities of the Philistines. He just destroyed one of the main defenses of one of the capital cities of the Philistines. So Samson has destroyed all the crops from that one valley, and he had killed some people. And then we have this great destructive thing happens in the valley of Sorek, and then he killed some other people. And now the story repeats that cycle. He killed 1,000 Philistines, and then he destroys the defenses of the city of Gaza. So what's the next thing we expect? Death. The pattern in the story of Samson is death, destruction, death. And then we repeat it. Death, destruction, death. And the last story about death includes Samson himself. So we'll get into that tomorrow. All right. Have a good rest of your day. We will see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
You too.